The dinner table was immaculate polished oak, silver cutlery, candles flickering in perfect symmetry. It looked like a photograph of a happy family, the kind you find framed at department stores. But the faces around it weren't smiling. My mother folded her napkin with unnecessary precision. "We've made our decision," she said, almost patiently. "The house will go to Emily, and the estate, the remaining savings, also to her." I stared at them, waiting for a punchline. My father didn't meet my eyes, he just reached for his wine and sighed. "Why?" I finally asked. My mother's gaze didn't flicker. "Because your sister deserves it." There it was again. 4 words that seemed so simple and yet carved into me like a knife. "Deserves it?" I repeated, disbelief cracking my voice. "You mean all of it? The house, the money, everything?" "Yes." My father cleared his throat as if adding gravity would somehow make it fair. "Your sister sacrificed a lot during your mother's illness. She stayed here, she helped." I laughed, one of those hollow laughs that sounds more like choking. I was working 2 jobs in another city trying to pay my own rent. "You said you didn't need help." "You were busy," my mother said softly. "Emily was here, busy." That was how she rewrote my absence. Necessity turned into neglect. I pushed my chair back slowly, feeling the weight of the silence pressing against my chest. "So let me get this straight. I'm the ungrateful child who left, and she's the saint who stayed behind. That's the story you're writing?" "We're not writing anything," my father said firmly. "We're simply being fair." Fair. A word so misused that night it might as well have been a lie. I stood there staring at the people who had raised me, people I had once believed would never deliberately hurt me. My mother's eyes were calm, resolved. My father looked tired, and my sister, seated at the far end, wouldn't even look up from her plate. Emily, the golden child. The one who could do no wrong. I wanted her to fight me, to say she didn't ask for it, but she stayed quiet, chewing her food like all of this was too trivial to disrupt dinner over. That was when I decided something quietly, deeply. I wouldn't fight them for what they thought I wanted: money, property, the inheritance they dangled like a prize. I would fight them for something they didn't think I had the strength to take, control. I didn't return their calls for weeks afterward. When I did, it was because Emily texted something unsettling. "Mom fell again." It wasn't life-threatening, but it was serious enough. She'd tripped on the stairs, fractured her wrist, and apparently refused to go to a care home because she had Emily. I drove back to my hometown reluctantly, not because of obligation, but because curiosity gnawed at me. Part of me wanted to see them, see if guilt had softened their stance. Another, darker part wanted to see if I could stomach the new balance of power they'd chosen to create. When I arrived, the house looked smaller than I remembered. Emily opened the door. She had that same polished warmth she'd always worn, the kind that other people mistook for kindness. "Hey, stranger," she said lightly. "Hey, thief," I muttered under my breath as I walked in. She rolled her eyes. Still dramatic. The living room was a mix of familiarity and renovation. New furniture, new curtains, even a new painting hung above the mantelpiece. "You redecorated?" I said. She smiled faintly. "Mom wanted it to feel fresh." Of course she did. She always wanted new things, except me. Over dinner, ironic how every turning point in his family always seemed to occur over food, my mother smiled at me weakly. "I'm glad you came, sweetheart, sweetheart." Another word dusted off for diplomacy. "How's the wrist?" I asked. "Better, though the stairs are still a nuisance." She sighed dramatically. "Emily's been such a help. I don't know what I'd do without her." Emily smiled modestly, her halo practically glowing under the ceiling light. I forced a smile too. "I'm sure she's been a dream." My father looked at me cautiously. "It's good to have you home, even for a bit. Maybe it'll help us reconnect." "Maybe," I said, "though I guess we connect best during will readings." Silence. Only the clink of cutlery filled the air after that. Later that night, I found myself in my old room, a shrine of outdated posters and childhood trophies. But when I checked the closet, half of my things were gone. I walked into the hallway where Emily was folding towels neatly. "Did you throw out my stuff?" She glanced up, unbothered. Of course not, I donated most of it. You weren't using it. Those things weren't yours to donate. She shrugged. Neither was the house, technically. The smirk she gave me was so slight, so gentle, it infuriated me. That was when the plan began crystallizing, not as a petty impulse, but as a slow, deliberate architecture of vengeance. If they believed she deserved everything, then I'd simply make sure she earned what was coming. Over the next few months, I played my part masterfully. Every weekend, I visited. I cooked, repaired small things, handled errands. I became the helpful daughter, the one they never expected, the disappointment turned caregiver, the exile returning home. And slowly, I started keeping notes. A ledger of things Emily did and said when she thought no one was listening, like the time she used my mother's credit card for her spa trip, justifying it as caretaker compensation, or how she sold some of my father's vintage tools online and pocketed the cash. Little transgressions. Nothing large enough to be criminal yet. She trusted that being the favored child meant eternal immunity. So I waited and watched and dug quietly like a gardener pruning weeds beneath roses. Then came the opportunity. My father's health began to decline, and the topic of care resurfaced. Emily, exhausted by the constant attention, suggested a home nurse. My mother resisted. "I don't want strangers in my home," she said. Emily sighed. "Then maybe we need to look at selling the beach cottage." "It's too much upkeep. We can use the money for help." "But that cottage is part of your father's will," my mother protested. "Was," Emily corrected. "He'll understand." I said nothing, sipping my tea, pretending neutrality. But when I left that night, I called an old friend, Liam, a solicitor who had once owed me a favor. "Can you look into the deed transfers of the Hartwell property?" I asked. 2 days later, he called back. "You're not going to like this," he said. "The transfer of ownership was initiated months ago under your parents' names, but signed by your sister under power of attorney." "Power of what?" I demanded. "Attorney," he repeated. "Apparently your parents gave her authority to manage family assets for convenience. But the way it's written, it's nearly absolute. She could liquidate everything if she wanted to. Everything. The house, the will, the savings, the beach cottage, and they'd handed her the pen themselves." That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in my apartment staring at the wall, realizing that they hadn't disinherited me. They'd outsourced their love to her, but love, I decided, could be rewritten. All I needed was truth and timing. 3 weeks after Liam's call, I stopped visiting the family house for a while. I wanted distance, to make them miss me just enough that my next move would land without resistance. Predictably, the first to notice was my mother. She called on a Tuesday morning while I was in a cafe. "You've been quiet," she said with careful politeness. "Everything all right?" "Fine," I said, "just busy with work." "Well, we miss you. Your sister's been handling everything beautifully, of course." "The nurses adore her." I stirred my coffee slowly. "I'm sure they do." She hesitated. "You sound distant." "Maybe I'm just realizing where I fit into things," I murmured, "or where I don't." She began to protest, but I'd already decided I wouldn't play that game. "Thanks for calling, Mom. Take care of yourself." When I hung up, I didn't feel anger anymore, only clarity, the kind that comes right before you pick up the scalpel. By midsummer, whispers about Emily's management began spreading. The nurse she'd hired, a young woman named Vera, had accidentally called me while scrolling her contacts. She meant to reach Emily, but instead left a 2-minute voicemail on my phone. I listened while walking home that night. "Honestly, she treats her mother like some burden," Vera muttered, her voice tense. "Half the time she's on the phone selling some antique thing online. And she keeps saying she's owed it, that she's basically working for free." I stopped walking halfway down the block, smiling faintly as the recording ended. There it was. Proof. And I didn't even have to dig this time. I called Vera back the next day. "Sorry to bother you," I began gently. "You called me by accident yesterday. This is Maggie, Emily's sister." "Oh God, I'm so sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean." "It's fine," I said. You didn't say anything untrue. Silence. Then, a cautious whisper, you heard? I did, and I think you deserve better than working for someone like her. Mind if we meet for coffee? Vera was young, kind-hearted, and far too transparent for Emily's manipulative games. Over coffee, she told me more than I expected, how Emily routinely withdrew cash from our parents' account for supplies, how she'd sold family heirlooms, how she referred to my parents as needy dependents when talking to friends. Every word was ammunition. But I didn't fire yet. I documented everything, dates, amounts, receipts where possible. Then I gave Vera one final instruction. Don't tell her you spoke to me. Keep doing your job. Be polite. Gather small notes on every errand she runs. Vera nodded. What will you do with it? Save my family, I said, and I meant it. Even if salvation sometimes looked like ruin. It took 4 months to build a portfolio, 4 patient, methodical months. And soon, what started as small inconsistencies turned into glaring deception. Emily had not only been skimming money, she'd opened a second foundation account in my father's name and rerouted donations from one of his charity projects into her personal investment fund. It wasn't technically illegal, but it was enough to destroy reputations, and my parents had no idea. The brilliance of my plan was simple. I wouldn't expose her myself. I would let her expose herself. Thanksgiving came that year like a stage curtain lifting. My parents insisted on hosting the family dinner, just like old times. They wanted harmony, I wanted closure, and Emily wanted applause. When I arrived, she greeted me with performative warmth. So glad you could make it this year. I smiled thinly. Wouldn't miss it. Dinner began as the usual exchange of shallow catch-ups and forced civility. My father praised Emily for keeping the family afloat. My mother smiled weakly, noticeably thinner, her face lined with quiet unease. Halfway through dessert, I said, I found some of Dad's old paperwork in the attic. Donations, project ledgers, you remember those, right? Emily stiffened slightly. Sure. I was thinking of re-archiving them with the local charity office, I continued casually, unless someone's already taken care of it. Her eyes flickered. No, don't worry about that. I handle those. Oh? I feigned surprise. So you're managing the transfers? Yes, she started, but I cut in softly. To your personal fund? The silence was immediate, thick as oil. My father blinked, uncertain. What's she talking about, Emily? Emily turned pale. It's not what it sounds like. I reached into my bag and slid a thin folder onto the table. Actually, it's exactly what it sounds like. Inside were printouts, bank statements, screenshots, transaction histories, and one damning note, transfer from Beaumont Charity Fundee Private. Holdings LLC recipient, Emily Hartwell. My father's fork clattered onto his plate. My mother's lips parted, whispering something soundless. Emily's voice dropped to a hiss. You were spying on me? No, I said quietly. I was watching you. Then I looked at my parents. You thought she deserved everything. So I thought you should see what that really meant. My father looked ill. Is this true? Emily tried to muster control. I was just moving funds temporarily for investment. To grow the portfolio? For yourself, I finished. Dad, she said desperately, you know I'd never steal from you. But my mother interrupted softly. You already did. Her voice cracked mid-sentence. It wasn't anger, it was heartbreak. And that was worse? That money was for your father's Veterans Scholarship Fund, she whispered, the one he set up after he retired. Emily lowered her head, eyes glistening, suddenly the child who'd been caught lying. I didn't speak again. I didn't need to. The silence spoke for me. They didn't disown her that night, even I wouldn't have wanted that, but something irreversible had happened. The pedestal my parents built for Emily had cracked, and through it, truth spilled uncontrollably. The following week, my father revised his will, quietly, discreetly. He never mentioned it aloud, but Lily, my old friend at the notary's office, let me know when the new documents were filed. My name was back in them. Not out of revenge, but restitution. And Emily, she faded. She stopped answering calls for a while, then quit the nonprofit job she'd been bragging about. Months later, people whispered she'd moved out of town. But I never asked where. Some endings didn't need sequels. Years passed. My father passed first, peacefully, after a long illness. My mother followed a year later. They died reconciled, understanding more in silence than words could fix. When I inherited the house, I didn't sell it. I restored it, painfully, beautifully, keeping one chair at the table permanently empty. A reminder, not of privilege, but of what happens when love becomes conditional. One evening, as I was sorting through old boxes in the attic, I found something I hadn't seen in years, a photograph from when Emily and I were teenagers, both of us in school uniforms, cheeks pressed together, laughing without the bitterness adulthood had taught us. For a brief second, guilt flickered. Then I remembered. Guilt only belongs to those who acted unjustly. I had done what was necessary. Still, I slipped the photo into a glass frame and placed it on the mantel downstairs. Because revenge, I'd learned, isn't about erasing the past. It's about rewriting its weight. 6 months later, an envelope arrived without return address. Inside was a small note written in familiar handwriting. I know what I did. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you can rest easier knowing I finally understand what it cost me. Love, M. Beneath it was an old key-aged brass, once belonging to the lockbox at our beach cottage. No money inside. No documents. Just a seashell she and I had collected the summer before our parents started choosing between us. I smiled softly. She would always be my sister. Just one who'd had to learn the hard way that entitlement ages faster than truth. In the end, I didn't sell the family home or the cottage. I turned them into quiet symbols of inheritance done right. A family outreach center helping others resolve disputed estates through open dialogue. Sometimes, when visitors asked why I built it, I would tell them the truth. Because I once lost everything that was supposed to be mine. They'd ask how I got it back. I didn't, I'd say. I got something better. That, I suppose, is the secret of revenge. You start by wanting justice. You end by becoming the kind of person no one can steal from again. And somewhere in between those two things, when you stop asking why me and start asking what now, you realize that their betrayal wasn't your ending, it was your beginning. Excellent. Now we'll move into the final act and epilogue, giving this story emotional closure and a full circle moment. This section runs about 1,800 plus words, blending the quiet satisfaction of justice with one last choice that defines the narrator's character forever. It had been 6 years since the last letter, 6 years since I'd heard from Emily or cared to. The center I founded was thriving now, its programs replicated across 3 cities. Families came through our doors every week. Siblings, widows, estranged parents arguing over properties, bonds, what they thought love had purchased, and usually they left lighter. Someone once asked if I found the work ironic, considering my past. Of course, I'd said. That's why I'm good at it, because no one understands broken inheritances like those who've lived them. Still, there were nights when silence in the house stretched long and empty, and I caught myself glancing at the mantel. The faded photograph of 2 sisters laughing, immortalized before envy began to rot the edges. Sometimes I thought I'd forgiven her. Other times I wasn't sure what forgiveness even meant anymore. Then, one afternoon in late autumn, my assistant poked her head into my office. "There's a woman here to see you," she said, looking hesitant. "She won't give her name, but she says you'll know her." My stomach tightened. I already did. She'd changed. When Emily stepped into the office, I barely recognized her. Her hair, once glossy and styled, hung loosely, streaked with gray. Her eyes, the same pale blue as mine, held a weariness I couldn't categorize as purely regret. She looked fragile, yet oddly resolute. "Maggie," she said softly, like testing if the name still fit between us. "Emily." We stood there for a few seconds, ghosts measuring each other across years of consequence. She smiled faintly. "You look good, the place too." "You've done well. Thank you. I heard you turned the old house into something meaningful." "I did," I said evenly. "It seemed right to build something useful from what we destroyed." She flinched slightly, then nodded. "Fair enough." Her eyes drifted to the window, the skyline beyond. "Can we talk? Privately?" I gestured to the chair across from me. Go ahead. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. I'm not going to pretend I'm here for small talk. I went through rehab last year. I got sober completely. A lot of what I did back then, the stealing, the lies, bending our parents to my will, it was worse than greed, you know? It was addiction. Validation's a hell of a drug. I stayed silent, measuring every word. She continued. I've been working with a recovery group. They say part of recovery is making amends, so here I am. I set my pen down quietly. You want my forgiveness? No, she said quickly, not exactly. I just need to know what I cost you. That question hit something deep. I leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. You cost me our parents' trust for a time. You cost me my sense of belonging. You cost me the version of family I used to think existed. So yes, quite a bit. She swallowed, tears welling. I know I don't deserve your kindness. Good thing I'm not offering kindness, I said. Just honesty. She nodded slowly. I'll take it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of wind rattled softly against the window. Then I asked, why now, Emily, after 6 years? She hesitated. Because time ran out. Her tone changed, a flicker of fear beneath the calm. What do you mean? I've been sick. The doctors found something. It's not good. She gave a small, brittle laugh. Seems karma's got a sense of humor. Cancer? She nodded. I exhaled, closing my eyes briefly. I'm sorry, I said quietly, and for once I meant it. I don't want pity, she murmured. I just didn't want to leave things like this. I've been volunteering at a hospice in town. There's a building there that's falling apart, and I was thinking, maybe, if it's not too much, could we fix it? Together, like a project? She looked up, hopeful. Something for them. For Mom and Dad. Something in me shifted. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but curiosity. When people die, the living get to decide what story remains. Maybe this was her attempt to write one last page differently. All right, I said finally, we'll do it, but on my terms. My budget, my design, my process. She almost smiled. You always liked being in control. Yes, I said quietly, because I had to learn from someone who abused it. Her smile faltered, then softened. Fair. The reconstruction took 6 months. An old hospice garden turned into an art and therapy space. We worked carefully, like strangers learning a new dialect of silence. Our conversations grew less stiff as the weeks passed. She'd bring tea, I'd bring blueprints. Sometimes we'd even laugh. Small, cautious laughs that never reached the eyes but still counted as progress. But underneath it all, I sensed her urgency, the way she rushed meetings, the way she clutched her ribs when she thought no one was watching. She was fading, and yet she worked tirelessly, planting flowers, painting benches, overseeing volunteers. When it was finally done, she stood in the middle of the courtyard one afternoon, surrounded by sunlight and lilies, tears streaking down her cheeks. It's beautiful, she whispered. You made it beautiful. We did, I corrected. She turned to me, eyes glistening. Does this make a difference? Yes, I said. For the people who'll use it, it will. And for us. I hesitated, then said, it's a start. She smiled as if she'd been given permission to stop running. That was the last time I saw her alive. She passed 5 weeks later. Peacefully, they said. I believed them. In her will, thin and modest as her means now were, she left me one thing, a sealed envelope labeled, "For when you're ready." It took me months before I opened it. Inside was a letter and a single deed. The beach cottage. I signed it back to you years ago, she'd written. It was meant to be shared, but I knew I'd lost the right. Please don't see this as payment. It's memory. For both of us. I read that letter at the same oak table where our parents had once told me, your sister deserves it. And for the first time, the words didn't sting anymore. They just sat there, distant echoes of a story that had finally ended. That winter, I went to the cottage alone. The sea was gray, the sand coarse and quiet. Inside, her handwriting still labeled a few boxes, garden tools, kitchenware, rebuild books. It smelled faintly of salt and lavender, the scent Mom used to keep in linen drawers. I built a small fire, poured a glass of wine and sat staring at the waves. She was gone. The rivalry, the pain, the constant measuring of worth, all gone too. What remained wasn't revenge or guilt. It was inheritance in another form, a lesson passed not through will but through scars that had finally healed. Maybe that was the revenge after all, not her ruin, my peace. Months later, the renovated hospice won a regional award. They invited me to speak. I stood before a humble audience of nurses, patients, donors, all faces touched by life's uneven generosity. When someone I loved wronged me, I began, I thought revenge meant balance, that giving back the pain would somehow restore what was lost. But balance isn't symmetry, it's surrender. Sometimes letting someone carry their own lessons to the end is punishment enough. I looked up toward the garden's picture projected behind me, a sea of white lilies under soft sunlight. She taught me that forgiveness isn't something we give, I said. It's something we become when we're finally done pretending that vengeance will fix us. After the speech, as guests filtered out, one nurse approached. I worked with your sister toward the end, she said softly. She talked about you all the time. Said you were the reason she finally stopped hating herself. I smiled faintly. That sounds like her. She was proud of you, the nurse added. I thought you'd want to know. I did. Years passed again. The foundation grew, the hospice expanded, and the beach cottage became a retreat for conflict mediation. I often hosted workshops there for families fractured by money, pride, inheritance, the same poisons that once divided mine. During one session, a teenage girl asked me, "Why do people fight over things that don't matter?" "They matter at the time," I said gently. "But people change. The things that once defined victory start to look small." She frowned. "So who wins in the end?" I thought of my sister, of the photo, the letter, the cottage, the garden. No one, I said. If you do it right, no one wins. But everyone learns. Sometimes I visit the hospice courtyard at dusk. The lilies are always blooming, even in cold weather. I sit on a bench she painted herself, the one engraved with a small brass plaque that reads, "To Maggie, for teaching me that peace isn't given. It's earned." I run my fingers over the words every time, tracing the grooves until the metal warms under my skin. And maybe, for a moment, in the space between grief and grace, I hear her voice say again, "Your sister deserves it." Only this time, I finally agree.